You redirected our login page to what? The CEO's voice cracked through the speakerphone like he'd just discovered his house was on fire. Someone knocked over a chair in the background. Another exec whispered, "He can't legally do that, right?" But they all knew the truth. I absolutely could. I'm Austin Hayes, 47 years old, and an hour earlier, I'd handed them exactly what they asked for, a clean repo link so sanitized it could have been used in a medical facility. But let me back up and tell you how a former Army signals intelligence specialist ended up teaching some civilians a very expensive lesson about operational security. 22 years ago, I was Staff Sergeant Hayes, managing secure communications networks in places where a single authentication failure could mean the difference between mission success and body bags coming home. The Army taught me that good infrastructure is invisible, redundant, and owned by people who understand the consequences of failure. When you're responsible for encrypted satellite links that keep soldiers alive, you don't cut corners and you don't trust amateurs with the keys. After my discharge, I brought that same mindset to corporate cybersecurity. Built networks for defense contractors, financial institutions, healthcare systems, places where data breaches make headlines and ruin careers. I learned early that civilians love to talk about agile methodology and digital transformation. But when their quarterly bonuses depend on systems staying online, they suddenly appreciate military precision. 2 months ago, I was just another contractor at TechFlow Solutions, a fintech startup in Austin that processed payments for mid-market businesses. Not an employee, not invited to their Pizza Fridays or team-building retreats, just a ghost maintaining the cybersecurity architecture that kept their money flowing and their compliance auditors happy. While their in-house development team spent their days arguing over sprint planning and naming variables after Star Wars characters, I built the zero-trust network infrastructure that actually protected their data. Multi-factor authentication cascades, encrypted API tunnels, SOC2 compliant logging systems. All of it functioned quietly because I'd engineered it with the same attention to detail I'd used for classified military communications. The beauty of proper security architecture is that it's completely invisible when it works. User clicks log in, credentials get validated through my authentication servers, tokens get issued, data flows safely. The whole process takes 847 milliseconds on average, and nobody at TechFlow had any idea how many layers of protection were running in the background. They called my work external security services, like it was some minor add-on they could swap out whenever they felt like optimizing costs. But without my secureflow.io domain handling their authentication backbone, their fancy React dashboards were about as secure as a screen door on a submarine. I'd architected their entire compliance framework, HIPAA for healthcare clients, SOX for publicly traded customers, PCI DSS for payment processing. All of it routed through infrastructure I owned and operated. Nobody cared about the technical details, though. Not until everything started falling apart. My arrangement with TechFlow wasn't anything revolutionary. Standard 18-month cybersecurity contract through my LLC, Hayes Security Systems. They needed SOC2 Type 2 compliance for their Series B funding round, and they needed it fast. I delivered both, a hardened security infrastructure that could pass any audit and documentation that made their lawyers happy. The contract negotiation took exactly 1 meeting. Their previous CTO, a guy named Phillips who'd actually read technical specifications, understood what I was offering. "You want to deploy this on your own infrastructure?" he'd asked. "Correct," I'd told him. "Your application stack runs on AWS, but the security layer needs to be isolated. Think of it as a digital embassy, sovereign territory with diplomatic immunity." He'd laughed at the military metaphor, but he got it. "As long as it works and we pass audit, I don't care if you run it from a bunker in Montana." The contract language was crystal clear. Security infrastructure, including authentication systems, compliance monitoring, and data protection services, may be deployed via contractor-owned systems, with service ownership retained by contractor unless explicitly transferred in writing. I might as well have written, "This will blow up in your face if you don't read the fine print in 72-point font." But Phillips signed it, filed it in their document management system, and we got to work. For 16 months, everything ran smooth as military clockwork. My security stack processed 2.3 million authentication requests per month with 99.97% uptime. 0 data breaches, 0 compliance violations, 0 angry calls from enterprise clients about login failures. I'd built them a digital fortress so secure that even their own engineers couldn't break it when they tried to optimize my code without asking. That lesson cost them 4 hours of downtime and a lot of explaining to customers. After that incident, I became the unofficial owner of all security operations. The guy with root access who nobody questioned because the alternative was explaining to million-dollar enterprise clients why their financial data might not be safe. I kept my head down, did my job, and stayed out of their internal politics. Remote work suited me fine. I could monitor their systems from my home office, respond to alerts faster than their on-site team, and avoid the kind of office drama that seems to follow venture-backed startups, like flies follow garbage trucks. Everything stayed stable until Phillips left for a bigger role at Microsoft, and the founder's niece showed up to modernize operations. Madison Parker, 26 years old with a fresh MBA from Wharton and the strategic vision of a goldfish in a blender. Her LinkedIn profile called her a digital transformation catalyst and a results-driven innovation leader. Her actual job seemed to involve sending passive-aggressive emails about operational expenditure optimization and questioning why they were paying contractors for work that AI could probably automate. First thing Madison did in her new role as Director of Digital Transformation was cancel the company's Figma subscription to save $20,400 annually. Never mind that it broke the design team's workflow for a week. Second thing was eliminating the shared Slack workspace to reduce SaaS redundancy, forcing everyone back to email chains that made collaboration feel like passing notes in detention. Third thing was sending me a spreadsheet with the subject line: contractor expense validation required. No greeting, no context, just an Excel file with 18 months of my invoices highlighted in yellow and a note at the bottom. Please justify these charges and provide cost reduction alternatives. I stared at that email for a full minute before responding. In the military, we had a saying, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. Madison was about to make a very expensive mistake, and I wasn't going to stop her. My response was professional and brief. All charges align with contracted rates and deliverables. Security infrastructure costs are non-negotiable for compliance requirements. Happy to schedule a technical review if needed. Her reply came back in 20 minutes. We'll be conducting a comprehensive audit of all external dependencies. Please prepare documentation showing how your services could be transitioned to internal teams. That's when I knew she had no idea what she was asking for. Transitioning my security architecture to their internal team would be like asking a community college drama club to perform brain surgery. Technically possible, but the patient probably wouldn't survive. I started keeping detailed logs of every interaction, every request, every poorly thought-out cost-cutting initiative. Military habit, document everything because accountability matters when things go sideways. The writing was really on the wall when I got the calendar invite. Operational review, HR Madison, 1:30 p.m. Friday, no agenda, no context, just the kind of meeting request that makes seasoned professionals update their LinkedIn profiles. I showed up 5 minutes early because punctuality is a sign of respect, and I still respected the process even if I didn't respect the people running it. Madison was already there with 2 HR representatives I barely recognized, Rachel from onboarding and some new guy who looked like he'd graduated from the University of nodding aggressively. The conference room felt like a tribunal. Madison had her laptop open with what looked like a PowerPoint presentation titled Operational Efficiency Initiative Phase 2. I sat down across from them with nothing but a notepad and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. Madison didn't bother with small talk, just clicked her pen twice and launched straight into what she clearly thought was a power move. Austin, she began, using the tone consultants practice in mirrors, we've completed a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis of all external vendor relationships, and your engagement presents several optimization opportunities. Optimization how? I asked, keeping my voice level while mentally translating corporate speak into English. She was about to fire me and wanted it to sound like a business strategy instead of poor decision-making. Your security infrastructure operates independently of our core technology stack, she said, reading from her laptop screen. This creates unnecessary complexity and potential compliance risks that could be mitigated through internal consolidation. I almost smiled. She'd just described my entire value proposition as a problem. Madison, are you familiar with Zero Trust network architecture? She blinked. I understand the general concept. Do you know the difference between authentication and authorization? They're both security functions. That's when I knew she was about to step on the landmine she'd spent 3 weeks carefully positioning under her own feet. What about certificate authority management, PKI infrastructure, OAuth token validation? Her confidence wavered for just a second before she recovered with the kind of deflection they teach in business school. That's exactly why we need to bring these functions in-house. Our engineering team needs to own these critical systems instead of relying on external dependencies. Rachel jumped in like she'd been waiting for her cue. The concern is scope creep, Austin. You've deployed systems that extend well beyond the original contract parameters. Now, I did smile. I deployed exactly what's outlined in Section 4.3 of the agreement. Security infrastructure under contractor control, including but not limited to authentication services, compliance monitoring, and encrypted data routing. Would you like me to pull up the specific language? Madison's jaw tightened. She clearly hadn't expected pushback with actual contract citations. That's not the point. The point is operational independence. We can't have mission-critical systems running on infrastructure we don't control. You mean the infrastructure that's given you 99.97% uptime for 18 months? The one that's passed every SOC 2 audit, every penetration test, every compliance review? I kept my voice calm, but inside I was already calculating how this would end. That's exactly what I mean, she said, leaning back in her chair like she'd just made a brilliant strategic move. Austin, we're terminating your contract effective immediately. We need you to transfer all external security credentials and provide complete documentation for internal transition by end of business today. There it was, the moment 18 months of careful preparation had been building toward. I paused, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to give her one last chance to understand what she'd just done. Madison, did anyone walk you through what those systems actually do? The authentication flows, the certificate chains, the API gateway configurations? She looked at me like I'd asked her to explain quantum physics. They provide security services. That's its job to figure out the technical details. And you're confident your internal team can replicate 18 months of architecture work in what time frame? They're very capable engineers, she said, dodging the question entirely. That's when I knew she didn't have the first clue about the complexity of what she was asking for. In her MBA-trained mind, security infrastructure was like office software. Cancel the subscription, install the replacement, move on with your day. Of course, I said, opening my laptop. I pulled up GitHub and copied a link to the public repository I'd prepared months ago. Here's the documentation. Everything external, authentication modules, compliance frameworks, security protocols, all current and well documented. Madison took the link like it was a trophy. Perfect. That wasn't so difficult, was it? I stood up, packed my laptop, and looked her straight in the eyes. Just one question. When do you plan to update your DNS records? She blinked again. Our what records? And that's when I knew this was going to be even more fun than I'd anticipated. I walked out of that conference room with the same calm I'd felt after completing a successful mission in Afghanistan. No anger, no drama, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done everything by the book and they'd chosen to ignore the warnings. What I didn't tell them, what nobody in that room had thought to ask, was that the repository I'd handed over contained clean documentation and reference code, but it was missing every single operational component that made their systems actually work. The live SSL certificates, DNS zone configurations, OAuth signing keys, API gateway tokens, database connection strings, all of that lived on my infrastructure, legally owned and operated by Hayes Security Systems, LLC, according to the contract they'd been too eager to terminate. I drove to my usual coffee shop on South Lamar, the kind of place where nobody bothers you if you sit with a laptop for hours. Ordered a black coffee and a breakfast taco, found a quiet corner table, and opened my security management dashboard. The interface looked deceptively simple, just a clean web portal with status indicators and toggle switches. But behind those switches were 18 months of carefully architected security infrastructure, authentication servers running on hardened Linux instances, certificate authorities with 2048-bit encryption keys, load balancers distributing traffic across geographically distributed data centers, all of it humming along quietly, processing thousands of requests per hour for a company that had just fired the person who built it. I found the control labeled Service Mode and clicked the drop-down menu. Three options: active, maintenance, transfer. For 18 months, it had been set to active. I changed it to transfer. It wasn't sabotage, it wasn't revenge, it was simply a change in operational status. They'd terminated the service contract, so the service was being transferred back to contractor control pending new arrangement. Every security protocol I'd built included automatic fail-safes for exactly this scenario. You can't just leave authentication systems running indefinitely without a valid service agreement. The change took effect immediately, but the visible impact would be gradual, like a slow-motion avalanche that starts with a few pebbles rolling downhill. I sipped my coffee and checked my phone. 11:47 a.m. Right about now, their systems would be starting to feel the effects as authentication tokens began expiring without renewal. The first sign of trouble appeared in their internal Slack at 11:52 a.m. I know because one of their engineers, a guy named Rodriguez, who actually understood infrastructure, had been keeping me in the loop on company drama for months. He forwarded me a screenshot. Anyone else seeing auth timeouts on the client portal? Then another at 11:58 a.m. Multiple login failures. Looks like OAuth is redirecting to an external domain. By 12:15 p.m., it wasn't isolated incidents anymore. It was systemic failure. Every single enterprise client was getting locked out of their accounts. Payment processing had ground to a halt. Access tokens were expiring mid-session faster than their systems could refresh them. The clean, professional login portal their users were accustomed to now displayed a simple message: service temporarily unavailable. Please contact system administrator for assistance. I'd programmed that message myself, along with automatic email notifications to their support team explaining that authentication services were undergoing scheduled maintenance due to contract status change. Professional, informative, completely accurate. My phone started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. I let them all go to voicemail. This wasn't the time for explanations. This was the time for them to fully understand what they'd lost. Rodriguez sent me another screenshot at 12:23 p.m. Their internal status board was lighting up like a Christmas tree, customer support tickets flooding in, enterprise clients threatening contract termination, the CEO demanding answers nobody could provide because the person with the answers was sitting in a coffee shop 3 miles away, watching the controlled demolition of their operational arrogance. Back at TechFlow headquarters, I imagine it was barely controlled chaos. Madison probably staring at her laptop screen, frantically Googling how to fix authentication redirect and wondering why her digital transformation certification hadn't covered this scenario. Richard Stone, their CTO, would be diving through server logs he couldn't interpret, looking for a magic switch that didn't exist. The beautiful irony was that they had the source code, they had documentation, they had everything they needed to understand how my systems worked. What they didn't have was the infrastructure to run it, the certificates to secure it, or the expertise to deploy it without breaking everything else in the process. At 12:35 p.m., my phone rang with a call from the main TechFlow number. I answered on the fourth ring just to be polite. "Austin!" The CEO's voice came through like a man who'd just realized his house was on fire and the fire department was on strike. "What the hell is happening to our authentication system?" I took a sip of coffee before responding. "Your authentication system is operating normally, it's just not accepting requests from your application anymore." "What do you mean it's not accepting requests?" "You terminated my service contract at 1:30 p.m. today. The security infrastructure automatically transitioned to contractor control at 2:00 p.m. That's how these things work when you don't plan for proper handover." There was a long pause. I could hear frantic typing in the background, probably someone Googling contract law in real time. "Austin, we need you to fix this immediately." "I'm not under contract to fix anything," I replied calmly. "You terminated that relationship about an hour ago. We can reinstate the contract." "That's an interesting proposal. I'm always open to discussing new business arrangements." "New arrangements? We just want things back the way they were." I smiled at my coffee. "I'm afraid that's not how termination clauses work. Once you end a service agreement, any new arrangement needs to be negotiated from scratch. Different rates, different terms, different conditions." The silence stretched long enough for me to take another bite of my breakfast taco. "What kind of rates are we talking about?" "The kind that reflect the actual value of infrastructure that processes 2.3 million authentication requests per month with enterprise-grade security protocols. I'll email you a proposal. How long will that take to prepare? The proposal? About 10 minutes. The restoration of services? That depends on how quickly you can wire a payment. I ended the call and opened a new document. Time to write the most expensive lesson plan in TechFlow's corporate history. I spent exactly 8 minutes writing the most expensive invoice of my career. 1 page, clean formatting, no unnecessary explanations. Just terms, conditions, and a number that would make them remember this lesson for years. Emergency Infrastructure Restoration. Hayes Security Systems, LLC, Client, TechFlow Solutions. Immediate service, restoration, $485,000. Payment terms. Wire transfer, funds cleared before restoration begins. Timeline, 4-hour restoration upon payment confirmation. Support, period, 90 days, transition assistance included. Future service, subject to new contract negotiation. Should I buy? Attached it to an email with the subject line Service Restoration Proposal and sent it to the CEO, copying Madison and Richard Stone for good measure. Then I ordered another coffee and waited for their world to finish falling apart. The response came back in 12 minutes. A phone call from Patricia Crawford, the only board member with enough technical background to understand what had happened. I'd met her once at a company holiday party, where she'd asked intelligent questions about their security posture while everyone else talked about quarterly projections. "Austin," she said, her voice steady but urgent, "I think we need to talk face to face. Are you available this afternoon?" "I'm available," I replied. "But I should mention that every hour of downtime is costing you approximately $47,000 in lost transaction fees, not counting the enterprise clients who are already talking to your competitors." "I understand. Can you meet us at 4 p.m? I'll send an address." The meeting took place in a neutral conference room downtown, the kind lawyers rent by the hour for depositions and hostile negotiations. Patricia arrived with Richard and one attorney who looked like he'd been briefed on the situation about 10 minutes earlier. I walked in carrying a single folder and the quiet confidence that comes from holding every card in the deck. No laptop, no presentation materials, just terms that weren't negotiable. "Austin," Patricia said, standing as I entered, "thank you for making time on such short notice. I think we can resolve this quickly." I nodded and placed my folder on the table. "I hope so. Your enterprise clients are getting restless, and Monday morning is going to be rough if we don't have this sorted out." She opened the folder and read my terms aloud. $485,000 for immediate restoration. She looked up. "This is significantly higher than your original contract rate." "Correct," I said. "Emergency restoration pricing reflects the urgency and complexity of the situation. It also includes 90 days of transition support to prevent this from happening again." Richard finally spoke up, looking like he hadn't slept since the chaos started. "Austin, you understand this creates a difficult precedent, right? We can't have contractors holding critical systems hostage." I leaned back in my chair. "Richard, with respect, I'm not holding anything hostage. You terminated a service contract without planning for continuity. The infrastructure reverted to contractor control exactly as specified in the agreement you signed. This is textbook change management." The attorney cleared his throat. "We'll need legal review of the restoration terms." "No," I interrupted politely. "You need payment authorization. Legal already reviewed this 18 months ago when you signed the original contract. The ownership language is ironclad, and every action I've taken is explicitly covered under the service termination clause." Patricia studied the terms for another minute. "What happens after the 90-day transition? Period? That depends on whether you want to build internal capability or negotiate a new long-term contract. Either way, you'll have functioning systems and proper documentation to make an informed decision. And if we decline your terms," I stood up, "then you spend the next 6 months rebuilding what I created, losing enterprise clients every day while your competitors welcome them with functional security infrastructure." "Your call." She exchanged a look with Richard, who was calculating the cost of downtime against the cost of my terms. The math wasn't even close. "We'll wire the payment," Patricia said. "How quickly can you restore operations?" 4 hours after the transfer clears. And that was it. No dramatic speeches, no lengthy negotiations, just professionals acknowledging that expertise has value and shortcuts have consequences. At 6:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a bank notification. $485,000 deposited to Hayes Security Systems LLC. I opened my laptop in the same coffee shop where this had all started and logged into the infrastructure management console. The restoration process was methodical, almost meditative. DNS records updated to restore proper routing. Certificate authorities reactivated for secure connections. Authentication servers brought back online with full token validation. OAuth flows restored to handle enterprise single sign-on requirements. One by one, the digital locks opened and the lights came back on. Login portals loaded correctly. Payment processing resumed normal operation. Compliance monitoring systems picked up where they'd left off without missing a beat. By 8:30 p.m., TechFlow Solutions was fully operational again. Their status board showed green across all services. Customer support tickets stopped flooding in. Enterprise clients could access their dashboards without issues. I sent Richard a simple message. All systems restored. Documentation package arrives tomorrow morning. Transition support begins Monday at 9 a.m. His reply was immediate. Thank you. This won't happen again. I believed him. Not because people suddenly develop wisdom, but because $485,000 is the kind of tuition that makes lessons permanent. The next morning, I woke up to 15 new messages. Job offers from companies that understood the value of real cybersecurity expertise. Consulting opportunities with organizations that treated infrastructure as an investment rather than an expense. One particularly interesting message came from my former commanding officer now running cybersecurity for a federal agency. Heard you just conducted a masterclass in operational security. Interested in protecting something that actually matters? But the most satisfying message came from Rodriguez. Boss, you're a legend. Madison got reassigned to special projects this morning. They're hiring a real CTO who actually understands infrastructure. Also, half the engineering team wants to know if you're hiring. I was. Because here's what business school doesn't teach you. Security isn't a feature you install or a service you can casually replace. It's architecture built by people who understand what happens when the walls fail. And if you're going to fire the architect, you better make damn sure you know where all the blueprints are hidden. I didn't burn any bridges that day. I just reminded them who built the road and who controlled the toll booth. Sometimes that's the only way people learn to read the fine print.